This is a Caterpillar D10 Bulldozer. It's made by CCM and it's in 1/48 scale. Now there's some interesting things that you might have picked up just now. I said it's in 1/48 scale as opposed to 1/50th. And the reason for that is that 1/48 scales allows you to make the machine, to make the model much more accurately to the real machine, just because the measurements scale down a lot better, because you're going from essentially 12 inches on the model here is equal to 48 inches on the real machine. And it's a lot easier to reduce everything down when you're working with a set of numbers like that, as opposed to 1/50th, where you kind of have to fudge some things because things don't look quite right sometimes. And you'll find that on a lot of 1/50th scale models that some things are just changed a little bit to look right, and it's not mathematically correct, but it looks right. And when you have a 1/48th model, you don't have to do that nearly as often, and it gives you a much more accurate representation of the real machine. And that's why CCM makes their models in 1/48 scale. It's the same thing with their 1/24 scale models. That's the reason why. Now the other interesting thing is, as I said, D10. There's no series letter here. This is the first D10 that was made. Now at the time, Caterpillar had only made the flat track models, and what they had was a D9H, and they wanted a dozer that was so much bigger and so much more powerful and so much better than the D9H. They wanted to make the best bulldozer in the world. And one of the things that they did was they came up with the elevated Sprocket design. And the idea is that your final drives generally take the most abuse on the dozer, especially if you're when you're backing up and running over some pretty hard material. That they can take a lot of abuse, and that's not something you really want to replace on the dozer, because it can get pretty expensive pretty fast, especially just with the wear and tear. And the idea of moving them up gets them out of the dirt, and it takes away, an awful lot of the abuse that they can get. Something else that does is it raises up the operator platform so much it gives you much greater visibility. It also allows you to use much bigger blades, just for the simple fact that you can actually see over them. Not that you can see anything over top of the hood anyway, but the idea is there. Anyway, so they had the D9H and they come up with the D10. Now, something that's interesting is the D10 was only the D10 once. And that sounds kind of confusing, and this is going to get real confusing here. The D10 was such a jump up from the D9H, the flat track D9, in terms of just power and size and just capability, that Caterpillar left themselves a giant gap, essentially, between the D9 and the D10. So what happened was, the elevated Sprocket machines were so popular, and the D10 was so popular, that Caterpillar basically said, okay, well, we're going to do the D9 and a high Sprocket and a D8 also. So what they did was they basically introduced the D9L and the D10, or not the D10, the D8L. So you have a flat track D8, you have a high Sprocket D8, you also have a flat track D9 and a high Sprocket D9 or D9L, and then you have the D10, which it doesn't have a letter yet. So they have 3 high Sprocket machines now, but there's still so much of a difference in power jump between the flat tracks and the elevated tracks that what happens when they do the next series, they go from the L's, the D9L, the D8L, and the D10 to the N series. The D10 actually becomes the D11N. The machine doesn't change that much, but it goes up. So a D10, the original D10 is actually a D11. Now, the D9L becomes the D10N. So if you actually bought a D9L and you went from a D9L to a D9N, you were disappointed because the D8L became the D9N. So where you had a D9 before, which is essentially a D10, you were going back a step to what was really a D8. So it's really kind of it's a little confusing there, especially when you're looking at the older machines, because you think a D9 is a D9 is a D9, and that's really not the case. Like I said, for I don't know, probably 10 years or so, it took a while for them to get essentially sorted into what the Dozer line is now. And like I said, it's kind of confusing, but once you step back a little bit and you kind of understand it, it makes sense. They just essentially they made the D10 too big. That's just the way it is. It was too big. So anyway, let's get into the model here. It looks great. It's a very good model. This is one of the Diecast, part of the Diecast series from CCM. They started doing, they'd always done like a couple models here and there in Diecast, and they did a very good job with them, and they were much more affordable than their brass counterparts. And so what CCM decided to do was basically start doing steady model production. They would do so many classic models like the D10, the 245, the 769 trucks. They would do the older models, and then every once in a while they would throw in a modern model with it. And the nice thing about these brass, or not brass, the die-cast models as opposed to the brass is, this Dozer, when it was new, was about $190. And by comparison, if this was in brass, it would be, you know, somewhere between probably $800 and $1,500. And when you think about it, at $190, there's an awful lot of collectors that can afford to put these on their shelves, and an awful lot of guys that can afford to take it apart and customize it. And when you have this in brass and you're looking at suppose it's $1,200, that's an awful lot of money to start cutting it up. So it's really a win-win for the collectors in the sense that you have a very good quality model at a very affordable price. Overall, just looking at it, the paint is very good. The decals are all very good. The hydraulic line is also good. You have a nice little fire extinguisher there, which is cool. The cab doors don't open, which is a little disappointing. Some of the newer diecast models they do, but not this one. The cab interior is pretty good. You can just barely see in there. The motor detail is very good. That looks about right. The mesh up here looks pretty good. You have a pretty good mesh on the hood. You can just barely see through it, but it looks pretty good. The tracks are very nice. They look great. The idler is spring-loaded, so it keeps the pretty good tension on the tracks. And underneath the bogey wheels, it actually has bogey wheels, which is pretty nice. It's really, for the money, it's really hard to beat. And the tracks do roll pretty good. Taking a look at the Ripper looks pretty nice. The cylinders are good. The hydraulic lines all look pretty good. It does have a pin that you can take out and you can adjust it. I think there's maybe 3 positions that you can, you got 3 positions that you can put the single shank Ripper in. Which is nice. If you look underneath, pretty basic, but I mean that's essentially what the bottom of a D10 looks like. The walking beam does work, which is cool. Alright, now as far as the blade goes, this one is actually pretty stiff. This cylinder is not so bad, but this one's pretty stiff. And I don't really want to move it too much because I simply just don't want to break the blade mounts or the cylinders. But it will actually hold any pose you want to put it in. Now, what's interesting is, so this is your your angle cylinder here. Like these two cylinders up front actually lift the blade up and down. This one controls your angle because you can tilt the blade left or right like that. So you can, that's how you, you can cut around corners and things like that. And essentially, if you're pushing real hard, you can't steer with the tracks. Basically, what you have to do, if you tilt the blade, the corner of the blade down this way, the dozer is going to go and just naturally push like that. You come back up level and you'll push straight again. And that's one of the reasons why that tilt cylinder is so important. What it also allows you to do is you can start cutting in slopes with it. You can work yourself up a hill or down a hill or whatever, and that's the reason for that. So anyway, you have a hydraulic cylinder here, and you got the lines that go across that anti-sway bar, and then you come across the other side, and you have what looks like a hydraulic cylinder, but it's not. What this is, essentially, you take this pin out here, and this is all threaded in here, and it's not easy to do, but you can do it. What you do is you take this and you twist it, and what this will do is it'll push the top of the blade either out or you can bring it in, and it'll change the angle or the pitch of the blade, and you can adjust it to the kind of work that the dozer is doing. You can adjust it to the material that it's working in, and it just makes it so that your resting angle of the blade is it matches the work you're trying to do. And that's the reason for that. So anyway, you adjust it in or out, get it how you want it, and you put the pin back in, and it stays that way. That's the reason why this looks the way it does. It looks like a cylinder, but it's not. I think on the carry dozers, I might be wrong, but I think on the carry dozers you actually have another cylinder here as well. And that the reason is that so you can adjust your pitch on the fly. Like if you only need it at a real sharp, if you only need your cutting edge at a real sharp angle for like a couple pushes, you can adjust that from the cab, make your couple pushes, and then go back to what your regular working angle is. It is a hell of a lot faster and so much easier than trying to do this by hand. This is miserable. You gotta fight it like you wouldn't believe. But anyway, that's the reason for that. A lot of people don't know that's what this is for. So anyway, overall, it's a pretty great model. Like I said, for the price point, it's really nice. You don't really notice the scale difference between 1/48th to 1/50th. It looks great sitting on the shelf, and it really matches up pretty well with all the other equipment. I mean, you can tell it's just a hair bigger, but it's very subtle. And to be honest, if you don't know what you're looking at, you're probably not going to notice it. Anyway, that's about it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask. If you'd like to see more of what we have, please subscribe to Maryland Construction Diecast, and thanks for watching.